Alrighty, and welcome back officially to a new edition of The Penalty. I'm your host, Trevor Cherney. Thank you so much for joining us for the first time in 2026. My apologies for not having an episode out sooner or whatnot. Just want to take a break, with the holidays and whatnot, and there's a lot going on. So, my apologies there. But yeah, now we're back at it. Now we're here in 2026. Like I said, I hope everybody had a great, happy holidays and whatnot. Hopefully, everybody got what they wanted and all that. So, I hope you guys had a real relaxful, great, New Year's, Christmas, whatever you celebrate. Just hopefully you got some relaxation out of it. Took some time off some work and all that. So, but now, unfortunately, we're back at it. Well, not for this show, but just as a whole. Unfortunately, we all gotta get back to work. So, in some way. So, alrighty. Well, here we go. We are back officially. Obviously, we got a lot of house cleaning things to get to, right? Since we haven't had a show in 2-3 weeks now, at this point. So yeah. So Lions. So obviously they're out of the playoffs. They finished 9-8. So the record just wasn't good enough to make the playoffs. They had their chances down the line to get in the playoffs. But both games that they needed to win, they lost. That being the Steelers and Vikings game. Now, let me just say this really quick, okay? I'm really glad this team didn't make the playoffs, right? And part of that is because I knew I knew deep down how uncompetitive this team was at many points during the season, right? If it's the Steelers game, if it's the Eagles game where the offense largely didn't show up, the Chiefs game where the offense once again didn't show up, and the defense didn't have a good game as well. Playing against Patrick Mahomes and whatnot. Overall, look, it's just the Lions really. I mean, and it's frustrating too because the last game they played against the Bears was their best game they had played in the past 2 months. So think about that, right? I mean, now all of a sudden you play the Bears, you play Ben Johnson, and now you have a reason to win. That sort of stuff needs to be cut out completely. It's just completely it's just horrible, what the season has come to. But what I'm hoping will come out of this season is I hope that Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes take a long look at this team and they're like, okay, clearly we didn't do a good enough job, with the whole process, dating back to last season. Now this season, we can look at each other and be like, okay, what do we need to do to improve this team and to put our players in the best position to win, right? At the end of the day, that's what needs to happen. It's Brad Holmes' job to acquire those players, to acquire talent, right? And then it's Dan Campbell's job to put those players in the best position to win. That's all it is in the NFL, right? And it's about doing that, right? And it's about doing the little things right, And I never thought that Dan Campbell was a bad coach. I never thought that Brad Holmes was a bad GM ever. Because clearly that's not the case. Clearly the Lions wouldn't have the type of success that they've had the past couple of years. But also, too, it needs to be better. And yeah, winning 15 games was great last year. Like that was fun. But they got smacked in the first round of the playoffs. Just like that. And then this year they didn't make the playoffs because they weren't good enough. Top to bottom, just weren't good enough. And this season has been incredibly disappointing. Just as a Lions fan, I expected more. I think everybody did. And making the playoffs is never good. Honestly, I don't care who you are, right? If you miss the playoffs, clearly something didn't go right this season. Then, right? And I know they had issues on the offensive line. I know they had issues on the defensive line and on their secondary. And I know they were banged up again. But like, how can we keep making these excuses over and over again, right? Especially with the injuries. Like, every team has injuries, right? Look at the Niners. Niners are missing their two best defensive players in Nick Bosa and Fred Warner. And they won, and they end up, nearly getting the 1 seed. Now they did get the 1 seed, but they nearly did. So, but yeah, overall though, I mean, look, I think once this season is officially over for the NFL, we'll get more into, the future and whatnot of the Lions. Well, obviously the Lions, they needed an OC. They fired John Moran earlier this week. That needed to happen. Possibly, honestly, if I'm Dan Campbell, I'm thinking about also hiring a new defensive coordinator as well. No offense to Calvin Shepard, right? I truly believe that he did the best job he could, being a first-time play caller, and having limited experience, right? But unfortunately, ultimately, it was his inexperience that really hurt him in the end. And any decent and any veteran offensive coordinator just basically did, just did circles around Calvin Shepard and his defense all season long. So I would think about making a change there too. Now, I'm not going to be – now, look, if they don't make a change at DC, like, that's not a hill I'm going to die on, right? But they need a new offensive coordinator, obviously, and they're going to get a new one. Now, the question is, who do you bring in? Daboll's name has been out there. There's been Nate Steelhouse, Zach Robinson over at Atlanta. He's available. I would love to bring in a former head coach too. Just saying. Like I said, Daboll. McDaniel was just fired today, so Pops McDaniel could be available as well. So there are definitely a few options for the Lions for their new offensive coordinator. And I just hope that they, use their options wisely. And, and I hope truly Dan Campbell, he goes outside the family, right, to get a new OC. Because honestly, I think it's time I don't think this should be an in-house hire, right? I think they should step outside the family, get some new blood in there, and get things going. Because they need it. Because right now they are getting a little too, just oh, well, everything's fine. The house is maybe burning down, but everything is fine. So they, they need outside help. Honestly, like, again, if I were Dan Campbell, I would try to get as much outside help as possible for the new coaching hires and whatnot. So yeah, that's Dan Campbell. So, or that's the Lions and whatnot. Like I said, we'll get more to the Lions as the offseason progresses. And then obviously, as the playoffs go on and whatnot, we'll talk about them more and more as they go on. Obviously, especially when we get closer and closer to the Super Bowl. So, and by the way, I have no idea who's going to win the Super Bowl. By the way, I can't definitively say who's going to win it. I can this year. My pick is Buffalo. simply because it feels like it's either this year or it's never for Josh Allen and the Buffalo Bills. That's what it feels like, anyways. So that's out of the way. And then Michigan hired a new coach over winter break. They hired Kyle Whittingham from Utah. So I do have some thoughts about this. I'm going to try and be as objective as possible about what I think about this hire, right? Give you my concerns, and then also, too, gives you some positives that come from this hire as well. Because, look, I think you'll look at both sides, look at the negatives, look at the positives. I'm going to start on the negative side. So here are my personal concerns for this hire, okay? One is that he himself has no Midwest ties or even majority of his staff as well. Now, there are some coaches who do have some Midwest ties, but for the most part, the majority of his coaching staff, as it stands right now, they don't have a large amount of people with Midwest ties, which when you're coaching for a team like Michigan, right, you need Midwest ties. Even in this day and age of college football, you still need it, right? Look what happened with John Smith in Michigan State, how that all turned out, right? And I'm not saying that's exactly. I'm not saying that this hire is going to be that, right? Obviously, they're different people, different hires, different points of their career, like clearly, right? So I'm not going to go around and say, oh, it's not going to work out. But I do have concerns, right? And not having any Midwest ties is concerning. I don't care what anybody says. If you are a college football head coach and you have no Midwest ties, and especially if you're going and coaching at a Midwest schools, like, you kind of need that, okay? Number two, he's closer to the 70. I mean, than not. I mean, again, look, age is, look, I get it that, like, hey, age is just a number, this and that, but, like, also, too, like, it comes to a point where, you know, you're so much more older than these athletes you have in your lockers, you know, your locker room and whatnot, and there needs to be a relatability factor, with coaching and whatnot, and it's hard to do that when you're closer to 70 than not at this point. So. But again, it's not a horrible thing, right? But it is a concern, right? I do believe that, if you would hire somebody who's at least a little younger than, the Whittingham, maybe it would be more relatable to, the athletes in the locker, hiring a DeBoer, that would have been my pick. It was Kalen DeBoer in Michigan. So that was always going to be my pick. So, and then lastly, one of the last things is that, don't forget, he was also at Utah for 20 years. Like, again, if he were a sought-after coach, okay, he would have left Utah 10 years ago, right? Why was, again, if he were this sought-after head coach at every cycle, which he has never been, okay? Sure, he's got a few interviews here and there, but this is the first time since he was at Utah that he's actually moving on from that program. And look, again, Utah has always had success, and they've always been kind of some, obviously they've been a smaller D1 school, whatnot. Obviously, if they're smaller than Michigan, I mean, that's pretty obvious, but it's a big leap and it's a big jump, and I'm not sure if Kyle Whittingham has what it takes to coach at Michigan, to be frank. Like I said, he had been in Utah for 20 years, and again, it goes back to having Midwest ties, right? But things that worked at Utah, right, won't necessarily work at Michigan, right? And going back to having no Midwest ties, another one of my concerns is he won't understand the rivalry between Ohio State and Michigan, or Michigan State and Michigan. You know, you need to understand that, right? You need to, as a football head coach, understand those things. If you don't, I don't know if this is going to work out. Now for the positives. He's bringing his own OC who was with him. My apologies. Who was with them at Utah? So and Utah had a pretty good offense, you know. So and look, I think if you're Michigan, you need to continue to run the ball. You need to continue with the development of Bryce Underwood. He's gonna be back for another year. You really got to focus and you really got to fine tune Bryce Underwood, because he has to be better than what he was this year. And anybody who tells you otherwise is completely lying. Not to say that he played awful or anything, because I don't think he did, but it's the simple fact of, he had a pretty underwhelming season for the most part, and really, maybe besides the Central game, like, he did not look comfortable whatsoever during the season. And that could have been just a shaky offensive line at times. That could just been, just starting at 18 years old as a freshman. He had happy feet, so those are coachable things and whatnot. The talent is there, clearly. The talent is there, but he needs to be coached. So hopefully Kyle Whittingham can come in, coach him up, help him become a better quarterback, and look, ultimately, at the end of the day, if Bryce Underwood is successful, then I truly believe the Michigan football is also successful as well. And, look, I can't make fun of the hire, right? And I'm not going to, because I don't know how this is all going to turn out, right? All I know is that from my experience and from, my school and whatnot, what they try to do with Jonathan Smith and how that didn't work out, right? My biggest fear is, that is going to somewhat be similar to what, is now happening in Michigan, where Kyle Whittingham comes in, no Midwest ties, and just doesn't work out. And I'm not saying that's going to happen, right? And I would be very surprised if he's gone within, a year or so. Now maybe he's gone in 3-4 years. He signed a 5-year deal, so we'll see about that. And it all kind of depends what happens with Ward Manuel as well, right? If Ward is out and they bring in a new AD and they also have a new president as well, if Michigan football isn't great, then getting rid of Kyle Whittingham may be an option, next 2 or 3 years. But we'll see. I'm not gonna say I'm gonna predict that or whatever. So, but it could happen, just with a new AD and new president. Even if Kyle Whittingham isn't bad, they just may want to bring in their own coach, at the end of the day. So, and that may be just for the greater good. So, anyways, that's about it. I think that's all I really want to talk about was the Lions and of course Michigan football. So, and them hiring Kyle Whittingham and whatnot. So, yeah, obviously we'll have a new show next week, and then we'll talk about the playoffs and whatnot for the NFL. I can't believe NFL playoffs are already here. Good God. We'll talk about possibly some Pistons basketball, since they've been playing pretty good as well. Talk about Red Wings and whatnot. They've been kind of hot as well. So there's a lot of things we still need to get into, which we will. So I appreciate you all. Thank you so much. Please like and subscribe. Please follow. Please share this episode. Would really appreciate it. And yeah, alrighty. Have a good one.